Taking the reins in Greece was Constantine Karamanlis, the conservative former prime minister and old foe of Andreas's father, George.
No, I was not surprised at all that Konstantinos Karamanlis was invited to come back to Greece, and that he was invited by the junta to come back in Greece. First, the junta would never invite Andreas Papandreou to come back. Second, Andreas Papandreou would never accept to be invited by the junta to come back to Greece.
Andreas made hurried plans to return to Greece. But he was a far different man from when he left. He had left Greece a centrist, but had returned a full-fledged socialist. His father and his influence was no more. So Andreas was free to create his own setup. It was the Pan-Hellenic Socialist Movement, or PASOK for short.
Yes, he did come back a changed person, I would say more radicalized in the spirit of the time, but also understanding that Greece had to really cut off the umbilical cord from its dependency on foreign powers and build its own strengths. So his whole program was national independence, Greeks to the Greeks, deepening democracy, social justice, emancipation, I would say both a national and a radical program for Greece. And this is how he built up PASOK.
It was the first time that the socialist word was used by, let's say, center power, not the communist power. We had all envisioned a new, radical, creative party, that people would participate, that they would fight for social equality, for national independence, all those beliefs. A new party, actually, that would work as a party.
For the next 7 years, Andreas Papandreu put into practice all the oratorical and political skills he had learned from his late father. His PASOK party attracted all kinds of people mesmerized by his speech and by his radical ideas, such as quitting NATO and even refusing membership of the then European community.
Ο Ανδρέας μπορεί να διεκήρυτε τι ακριβώς αυτός επίστευε, αλλά ποτέ αυτά δεν τα ενέταξε να τα βάλει στο ίδιο κανάλι με την πολιτική της χώρας, ήδη από τότε που έγινε κυβερνήτης. Δεν υπάρχει πουθενά, δεν έχετε συναντήσει τον Ανδρέα να λέγει ότι θα βγάλω την Ελλάδα από την ΕΟΚ.
Small wonder that Karamanlis saw in Andreas a danger to his policy of keeping Greece firmly aligned with the West. When Karamanlis said publicly that Greece belongs to the West, Andreas came up with an ingenious reply. Greece, he shouted, belongs to the Greeks.
Όταν λοιπόν απαλαμβάνεις που ανήκουμε στην Δύση, και βέβαια ανήκουμε στην Δύση, όπως άλλοι λαοί ανήκουν στους Αντασμεύτους, ανήκουν στους Αθολικούς, ανήκουν στους Αφρικανούς, οπότε είναι αυτοί να ανήκουμε στην Δύση. Προτιμούμε να ανήκουμε στους Έλληνες.
Andreas was thumbing his nose at powerful America, a tactic that earned him legions of voters.
We understood that the 7 years of dictatorship in Greece were deeply linked up with mechanisms of the CIA and NATO.
In the elections of November 1974, Andreas Papandreou's socialist PASOK party got just over 13% of the vote. 3 years later, in the elections of November 1977, Papandreou almost doubled that to 25%. His anti-American, anti-European, anti-capitalist rhetoric was working.
The other thing was that Papandreou was very clever because he realized the communist left was propagating revolution, which everybody knew would never going to happen. So Papandreou envisaged something very different. He said, look, forget about revolution and undermining or overthrowing the system. Come with me and I'll get you into the system from the inside.
By 1980, it was apparent that the Greeks were ready for a change, and Andreas Papandreou, taking a page from the Adlai Stevenson campaign of 1952, vowed he would give them just that. Change was the big buzzword.
Ανέβηκε διότι ο κόσμος, ο ευρύτερος κόσμος και ο αριστερός κόσμος ιδιαίτερα διψούσε για μια ουσιαστική αλλαγή των πραγμάτων.
The Greeks had never tried socialism, and many of them wanted to see what it was all about. The result in the elections of October 1981 was a whopping 48% for PASOK, one of the biggest governing majorities Greece had ever seen. At 62, Andreas was finally the Prime Minister.
Ομνίω να τηρώ το Σύνταγμα και τους νόμους
και να υπηρετώ το γενικό συμφέρον
του ελληνικού λαού. Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, σήμερα ορκίστηκε η κυβέρνηση της Αλλαγής. Ο εκλογικός αγώνας έληξε. Η Αλλαγή ενίκησε. Αλλά από σήμερα ξεκινάει το μεγάλο έργο της οικοδόμησης της Νέας Ελλάδας.
Andreas Papandrέu was a natural leader of men, and he knew it. Even his enemies conceded he had charisma. But in a way, he was still the same Andreas whom Margaret had met and married all those years ago.
One thing that perhaps people don't understand too well, that he was really a very good family man. We spent quite a bit of time with the children, especially, of course, in academic life where the possibilities were greater. But even in political life, because Andreas had a kind of organized life, a certain time for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, and also in terms of his political actions, it was organized neatly. Maybe it was the mathematical aspect of his brain.
He had many qualities going for him. For one thing, he could speak English much better than any other Greek politician. He was comfortable in foreign capitals and chancelleries, and could charm the socks off anyone.
Viewing Papandreu as a master manipulator is the understatement of the century. He was something more than just a master manipulator. He could sell anything to anyone. He had this charisma to sell, ice to Eskimos. Remember the bases. The American bases were supposed to leave, but stayed. The Arab-Israeli conflict, the investments that were expected from Arab countries here, you name it, he knew how to manipulate it.
He had a habit of smoking a pipe, which gave him that urbane Western look despite his avowed socialism. He kept his magnetic attraction on women. It was an open secret that he used it, and often. While in Sweden, he met Rania Niblum, a journalist with whom he had a daughter.
I had no idea that there was a daughter for many years from another wife, but I did, at the age of 13, know I had guessed, and I told my mother they had fallen in love with another woman. And that was when my father realized if Nick, at 13, can see this between him and the Swedish women, something's going on. And she put her foot down and brought him back to the family fold.
Far from being scandalous to the Greeks, such behavior in a leader was quite accepted. It represented virility.
He did like women, of course, but that included me. So he was actually faithful, deeply faithful in many ways. I had some harsh times, but he was always there.
In politics, domestic and foreign, Papandreu was a master manipulator.
And that was a time when there was so much excitement that people would volunteer to work in all sorts of activities, planning for the future, architectural plans, health plans, which were then brought into fruition for free.
In the international arena, Papandreu established important alliances on both sides of the Atlantic, enforcing relationships with the Eastern countries as well as the Arab world.
So this, I think, was very important. As far as the Greek-US relations, I think he put them on a normal track, because what he said is, let's have equal relations, understanding that America, of course, is a superpower and Greece is a smaller country, but one which we should be a relationship of respect. And his visit to the United States under the Clinton administration, I think, was historically the epitome of that new relationship which developed between our two countries. And he played an important role in helping Clinton through his contacts in the Middle East, in working with the Israeli conflict, also with the Syrian then issue, which unluckily did not come up to some final stage of a solution. But I think these were his important contributions to Greece, which are lasting and will last for many years.
The Arab world felt that they had a Western leader who understood them,